to bring this all forward today, Stuart, you really asked a great question. What are the trends and what we're seeing? And I think there's two main trends we're seeing that I think are a result of two main things. First and foremost, as I mentioned a few times, persistence is a great way to detect malware. And now most Mac security tooling, even macOS itself, which we'll talk about in a second, has the ability to monitor and detect when anything gets persisted. So this is problematic for malware authors because they are waking up to the fact finally that, if their malware persists, that's a very noisy event. And so, it's something that they're now thinking twice about before engaging, whereas before 95% plus, anecdotally speaking, of malware would persist. We're really seeing less malware persist. And Stuart, you mentioned that Apple has kind of introduced some new architecture changes in macOS. What we're talking about specifically is known as BTM, or background task management. And it's Apple's attempt to kind of bring in disparate persistence mechanisms into one single, subsystem. And in a nutshell, what background task management is, it's, well, a few things, but at its core, it's a database that tracks persistent items. And I think Stuart on the slide is showing us where the database is. But also, it's what generates an alert now on macOS that says, hey, something has persisted. And this is a great idea. I actually wrote a tool, released it, I think in 2015, called Block, and it would monitor for persistence, again, because malware, the vast majority, would persist. And the idea is a tool like Block would just say, hey, something persisted. It would explain what that item was. And then it would be up to the user to be like, oh, yeah, that's, I'm just installing something, or hey, that's weird. I just opened a Word document and now Block is alerting me that something in the background persisted. It's probably something that is a sign of infection. Well, I like to think Apple was inspired by that. I have no proof of this, obviously. But now macOS does something similar where when an item is persisted as, for example, a login item, a launch agent, or a launch daemon, there will be an alert shown to the user saying, hey, something persisted, which is, from a security point of view, really good. But again, malware authors are like, now our persistence actions are taking alerts. And so that's something that they're thinking twice about. So in terms of trends, as I mentioned, kind of we're seeing a few things. First and foremost, malware that doesn't really need to persist is not persisting. And we're seeing that with stealers, and we can talk more about that shortly. Ransomware is another example, something that doesn't need to persist. And then, if malware is persisting, maybe it's using more creative events, and we can kind of talk about that more.